What's up, guys? Last time we left off with something like this. I have a list of employees, first and last name, and I want to give them an email and an ID number. We have the skeleton with everything in place. When I print, I see first, last, email, and ID, but we got to fix all the details. This first one, Pearl Ramsey, gets P. Ramsey, that works. But there are some names that need to be cleaned up. For example, there's an S. Baker, and then there's another S. Baker, and they can't have the same address. And then there are characters like this apostrophe and O'Brien. I'm pretty sure most email servers don't let you do that, so we have to clean up the characters a little bit. And then with the ID, well, I just gave them all the same string as a test, but of course we got to give them something unique that we can use to find them, and maybe with some security implications that it can't be predicted. So today we're going to do those, and then if we have time, write this to a file, because when I run it and print it, that's ephemeral. It goes away as soon as I close the window, and we want to keep these for the future. So let's take a look at the name first, because it has a lot of tiny steps, some of which can be easy. Like removing characters, well, that's easy. We just don't take them, right? The thing with the letters, well, that's going to be a little tougher, but let's do the easy part first, get us on a roll. So I'm going to make another baby function, and whenever I have a generic, vague process, I don't really know what to call it, I'll just call it process, and we can always change the name later. And the parameter, well, it could take any string, it could be a name, maybe the full name with the space, or maybe after we split it, or maybe we'll give this function something else later, I'm not sure. I'll just say name, and we can always change it, like I said. So first, let's say I'm just going to delete the hyphen, like Mary Jo, even though that's not going to show up in the email, and the apostrophe, stuff like that. So let's just say I'm going to filter with a function to say if you're an alphabetical character or a space, let's give them a space, I'm not sure if we'll use that, otherwise you're out, okay? So we're going to go lambda C. Lambda is just a baby function. You can cram it in the middle of another expression. And C, well, that's short for character. So I'm going to say C dot is alpha, or C is space, okay? And then we're going to give it the name. And this is really short. Right now it could be a single line, but I know that we're going to add more stuff later, so why not give it breathing room. And the filter doesn't give you a string, so we're going to go join that thing. Okay, so let's try that. Let's go process the full name, maybe before we split, maybe after we split, I don't know. And if I run it, I'll notice right away this O'Brien near the end, so we'll see if he's any different. Uh-oh. Whenever you hit run and it takes a second, I always worry. But maybe it was fine, okay? O'Brien, that one worked. We took out the apostrophe. And since this is such a simple thing, I assume it's going to work for others as well. Now, let's think about this accented letter issue, because it's not as simple. We're not just ignoring a character if we don't like it, right? That's what the filter does. It says, hey, if you're one of these, you get in, and if not, then, you know, the bouncer keeps you out of the salty spittoon. But in this case, we're changing characters, or at least that's how it seems. I want to take, you know, where's an example? This E with this Vietnamese accent, and I want to transform it into a vanilla E, which is not immediately available. There's not like a function in Python where you just say downgrade and you give it a string. So I looked up how to do this, and it's a slightly more complicated thing than you would hope, but I found a Stack Overflow, scrolled down until somebody seemed like he knew what he was doing, and this answer does in fact work, but it has a few things I want to change. So let's just do it for the moment. The classic copy paste without changing anything, without figuring out how it works. Just steal it, and then we'll change it, understand it, improve it, and go from there. So I'm going to copy, paste, and you see this imported a module called Unicode Data, which is Python's standard library. We don't have to install anything new. And it does two methods from that. We got the normalize with some strange parameter, and then we've got the combining as part of their filtering. So let's apply that, see if it works, and then mess with it. Okay, so see the result here. There's no error, that's nice. And Mr. Nguyen got a vanilla E in his email, which is what we wanted. That's nice. Let's see if there's another one we could find. Mr. Salanya got a vanilla in right here, and that's great. So what's going on here? First of all, can we combine these? Because that's really one step, is removing all this stuff. And second of all, what the heck's going on? Okay, so the Unicode data handles the fact that a character is not always just a character. When I visually see this in with an accent over it, or this E with an accent over it, you know, that might be stored as more than one thing, more than one byte, and then the computer shows me what it thinks I want to see, which is a new version. For example, emojis are kind of built up out of parts, like there's the face and the color and the eyes that go on top of it, and then they're all combined into one, so that when you're making them, you can mix and match parts, but when you see them, you see the whole thing. At least that's my impression of how it works. And so here's an example I found that's a good illustration. This capital C with a cedilla under it, that means it's a S and not a K. Okay, you might see that in French. I think they use it in Spanish. I think I've seen it in Romanian and Portuguese. It's a useful character. But there's more than one way to make it, which is, okay, this has a specific name, a specific byte configuration for the whole thing. You could imagine a stamp that's got the C with the cedilla all in one. Or there's a combining way to create it, which is like, how about a C? And then we add the little cedilla, the little tail, in a separate stamp. And the end result is the same. Visually, I just see that character when I print it. But if you say equals, well, they're not equal because they're not the same ingredients. So how can we get this into a form like the second one? Because then we can peel off that second byte and only use the first one. If I have the capital C and the cedilla all in one, I can't work with it. But if I have the capital C as a single thing and then the cedilla as another single thing, then I can just keep the capital C and toss the rest. Like I said, there are some characters that go up to 4 bytes and not just 2, like here, where you got a base character and then maybe something above it, something below it, something on top of it, whatever, maybe a color byte, you know? And so we want to figure out how to get that core without the decorations and just peel that off for our vanilla email address character. And in our code, they use 2 of these methods. There's the normalize, which is gonna turn like this guy into this guy. So I can't show you by printing it because they look the same. But it's gonna turn this representation into this one. And then there are different ways of normalizing, like you can, you know, do the steps in a different order, but for our case we're gonna use the standard called NFKD, which will replace all the parts with their accent mark, like the stamps that I'm imagining, you know, the acute accent over the E, that kind of thing. And then there's one called combining. So once you separate it into those different parts, the core characters, like the C or the E, have a class 0, which is like the base. It's the vanilla version. And then the other ones have some other class that says, are they a thing that goes above the letter? Are they a thing that goes below the letter? Are they a thing that changes the color? Whatever. And so we're going to take the ones that have a class of 0, which in Python is the same as false. So that's why there was a not in there. And I am going to combine these into one step, mixed in with this, because there's no reason to do two separate functions stacked on top of each other when they're potentially the same idea, right? Just give me the letters. And one more change is I'm going to take off this little U. So that answer we stole from on Stack Overflow is from 2015, or maybe before, because it was edited then. And that was using Python 2. And in Python 2, you had different string encodings, but in Python 3, everything is Unicode. By default, you don't have to say U, which is what that meant. So I can take that off. I can also take these brackets off to use a generator, if you must know. But I think I'm going to use the filter instead, because I've already set that up here. So I'm just going to say this guy is going to join our criteria up here. And then this guy is going to be our new raw material in here. So we don't need that. We could change the name. Okay, input string is very vague. Mine, I called it name. Yeah, whatever you think. Hey, guess what? They already used the name C. Did I use the name C? And let's try that. See if it does the job. Okay. So we've got this idea of removing the apostrophe, like on O'Brien. That happened and it didn't go away after all my changes. And then we got the idea of removing accents, like on Saldana, and that worked. It didn't go away after my changes. So this is pretty good. The name process is really goofy because it doesn't tell you what's going on except that we're processing the data, which is everything that every program ever does. But I do like keeping it separate. It's not inside the generate email because we could use it for other things along the way, right? I feel like putting the lower in here so that we don't need all these apostrophes at the end, because the lower is, again, it's part of the same process of fixing the names up, and I didn't ruin it by dragging that over. So now we're going to think about the check for duplicates. If you notice, when I highlighted this, my editor told me, hey, there's another one of those down there, so maybe we can use the same pattern on both of these functions. Because what we're going to do is, instead of returning it right away, we're going to, save it somewhere, maybe specific to this function, or maybe just part of the normal place where we're saving everything, and check. Whenever I do Sarah Baker, I'm going to say, is there already an S. Baker? If so, I have to add some extra step. So let's just have a thing called emails. It'll start out empty, and then we'll take this, give it a name, and say emails.append and then return. So this isn't actually doing anything. It'll have the same result, but I'm just running to make sure there's no error, I didn't mess it up, that kind of thing. Because if I add 2 more steps and then I check for an error, well, I don't know where it was. But now I know this part is relatively safe. If there's an error, then it's kind of a stealth one. And in our main, let's just real quick print the len of emails, because it should be 100 after we put them all in the list, right? Okay, it is. That doesn't say anything about whether they're any good, but that's something. So now we have to insert between these steps, hey, if it's already in the list, we got to do something else. Okay? So while email is in emails, we do something. And I'm going to jump over here for a minute because we're going to have the same pattern. We're going to say ID, not ID, because that, you see it's turning blue. ID is a function in Python, and I don't want to use that. So I'm going to say ID number, which it's suggesting because I did it earlier when I was testing this out. And then we're going to go IDs dot append, and then we're going to return ID number. But if in between those there's an issue, we have to make a new one, right? So that's the same pattern. We keep a list, we generate the thing. If it's in the list, we have to do something new. And then once we're finally past that, and we're sure that it's not in the list, we add it to the list and return it. Same thing here. I haven't actually filled in the details, but I've done the pattern, which is nice, because I know it works. If I had gone really deep into this and I wasn't sure it was going to work, I wouldn't copy it over here yet. But for this, it's a good basic setup. Okay? And now, what do we do? Well, here's where it gets interesting, because we have to figure out how to distinguish the emails. And it depends on your situation, right? If we had 100 million people, well, then there would be a bunch of Sarah Bakers, there would be a bunch of John Clarks, and we'd have to really distinguish. But for this, I've only got 100, and you can imagine this company might have 100 more, but it's not going to get into the thousands or millions. So we can do something simple. What I'm going to go with is just another letter, because that's what we do at the school, right? If there's an A. Johnson, and then Adam Johnson joins the school, well, he would be A.D. Johnson. We just go with another letter from his first name. And like I said, that wouldn't work if we had so many that it was like, okay, the next one is A.D.A. Johnson, and the next one is A.D.A.M. Johnson, and then the fifth, well, he's run out of letters to use. We'd have to do something else. But we're not going to have 5 Adam Johnsons, okay? We're a small company. So I'm going to go, this part needs to change. This little 0 where we get the initials, we got to just go farther. And then in the ID number, something different is going to change. So it's going to be different inside of this little loop. Well, let's see what we can do here. So imagine we're going to start with 1. And then if that didn't work, you just do another. You go further into the name, and then you just do the same thing again. I hate copy pasting. Maybe we'll find a prettier way later, but let's try this and see if it works. Uh-oh. The ID number thing is not right. It's getting stuck. So let's do it, and then test both at the same time, which is a bad idea. You don't want to test 2 things at the same time, but I messed it up by getting ahead of myself. So what are we going to do? We're going to say random. We're going to go random. If we want it 6 digits, then that's between 100,000 and 1,000,000. And then same thing in here. Since it's random, we don't even have to change anything. We just roll the dice again, right? So if I say import random, let's give that a try. Hey, that seems to be working, right? We got different ID numbers. Now I haven't tested if they're actually getting the collisions. If I've got an ID and then I randomly choose that same one, is it really noticing that and choosing another? Well, we could test for that. And then the emails, that one's easier to test for because I know we have a Sarah Baker and then another Sarah Baker. Are they at the end? Let's see. There's one that's SA because she's the second Sarah Baker. And I even put a third one, if you see down here. I wanted to see if it could go farther, SAR. So if we had another, she'd be SARA, and then the next one would be SARAH. And if we had another, then this would fail, right? This would fail if we had a bunch of people with the same name, or really short names. Like, you know, you have like a name Lee, L-I. If there was a Lee Chen, and then another Lee Chen, well, sorry, we don't have room for a third one. And in a big company, you probably would have names like that that would just collide. So this would fail if we had too many people with shorter names. And this would fail if we had 900,000 people, we'd just run out of IDs. Or even before then, it would be inefficient because the 900,000th guy would have to draw randomly a bunch of times until he happened to hit the one candidate that was left over. So if we were doing a big company, we'd use a different strategy. That would be ridiculous to just hope we hit the ones that are available. Maybe you'd generate a bunch of numbers and shuffle them and take one off the top. Or maybe you'd go in order and you just say like, oh, the last guy was 705,382, you're 705,383. But I think I mentioned at the beginning, there's a little bit of security involved. You don't want the numbers to be predictable because if someone knows your name and when you join the company, they could guess your number and then they could get one step closer to logging in as you. Maybe we don't want that. So I'm going to stick with the random for now, but you got to keep in mind our context determines our algorithm. These work fine for the amount we have, which is 100, but they would be bad for 100,000, and they'd be really bad for 100 million. Finally, let's talk about writing to a file, because that's what we want to do. We don't want to just lose these when I close the window. So luckily, writing to a file is pretty much the same as reading. You just have to add a little bit extra. So when I do this loop and I'm printing them, I'm not saving them anywhere. I'm not having like a name object or like a person object with person.name, person.email, whatever. So I could save that, and then once I've got all the names prepared, open the file and write them. Or I could just write them as we go. Hey, I've got this person's email and number, write it down, forget about it, do the next one, etc. That is obviously quicker to write, but in general you want to separate things. Let's do it the quick way first and see if we have time. So I'm going to make another file. In order to write without messing up the original. If I try to write on top of this and I mess it up, then I've lost my data. Or even if I do it right, sometimes you want to go back to the original to see what order we got them or whatever. So let's say I've just got impdata.txt, and I'm going to open that one for the purposes of writing, which requires an extra parameter. Because if you open, by default, you're in read mode, which means you can't mess it up, which is good. But if you want to say, hey, I'm going to write, you put a W, okay? And then we could call it F again, or we could call it something else. F is fine. Remember, after this indenting ends, we're done. The original one is closed. It's not important anymore. We're done. So we might as well use the same name just to show that, like, no, seriously, that one is not in the picture. And then you're going to use f.write, which is pretty much what you think it is. I could imagine just taking this and putting it in there. And then instead of print, we say f.write. Let's try that and see what happens. Okay, they're going to say, when you do print, you can give it multiple things separated by commas, and it will put a space between them, make it look nice. But the write does not do that for you. It says, hey, you got to give me one string, one thing, okay? So let's look at our file real quick. It didn't write anything. I was just checking to see if it wrote anything at the first line, but it didn't. So instead, we have to put these together. And I don't want to use a plus, because then I'd have to put the space, and I'd have to go like all of this stuff that's too tedious, right? So instead, I'm going to use an F string and put these guys in. Does it work if you highlight? Oh, that's lovely. So if you highlight and you put the left curly bracket, it'll do the right on the other side for you. And this will preserve the spaces. So that's nice. If I do that, it's going to be one giant string with no breaks, so I want to put a line break in there, which is the \n character. And it's still theoretically one long string, but when I look at it, it'll visually stack it up for me nicely. So let's try that. I see nothing, but if I open the file, hey, look at that. It did, in fact, write the stuff. And then I could close this and open it tomorrow, and it would have my employee data. And in theory, I could upload this to the servers that we use for payroll or something like that. Okay. Now, again, this is a little bit of a bad idea to open the file when you're not ready. You know, to open the file and say, oh, hang on, let me generate these emails, let me generate these IDs. I'd rather prepare all that and then open the file once I've got it. But to make this video, I was going to say short, it's already too late for that. But to make this video short enough, I'm going to end it with this. And then in the future, we'll talk about like holding our data in Python, keeping it there until it's good. And then finally, at the last second, we open the file. Boom. There you go.